Are these new Quick Gen paints from AK Interactive a figure painting shortcut for scale modelers? Let's find out. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use it to paint your miniatures, and I'm also going to show you a couple hacks that can be really useful for figure painting. These Quick Gen paints are AK Interactive's foray into the world of contrast paints. Now, contrast paints aren't exactly a new thing. They're popular in the wargaming world for when you have to paint lots of little dudes for a big army. But now that AK has jumped into the mix, they're likely to be on the radar for scale modelers too. The idea behind contrast paints is that it's one product that combines a base coat, shading, highlighting, tinting, etc., all in one step. It's designed to flow into recesses and settle over the raised areas, creating instant depth and definition with just a single coat, which makes them perfect, or could make them perfect, for scale modelers who want fast, effective results on small, detailed figures. Or at least that's the idea. Now, the most popular method for figure painting in the scale modeling world centers around glazing. You use thin, translucent layers to subtly tint a surface, smooth out highlights and shadows, but it requires careful control and multiple passes to get the right effect. Now, I know a lot of scale modelers struggle with getting glaze consistency right every time you load up the brush. Not to mention, this process is one that can take a while. I usually don't mind spending hours painting figures, but there are times where it's just not worth the hassle. Now, maybe you've got some figures that are going to be bit players in a diorama. Maybe you'd rather spend that time painting tanks and AFVs. Or maybe you've got some kind of crappy figures like these Gecko paratroopers that just don't deserve all that much of your time. I picked up this box set of AK's Quick Gen paint for US uniforms with the goal of getting these guys painted up quick for a diorama. And true confession, that's not the only reason. I'm also a sucker for trying out new painting and weathering products, so the excuse to buy them was there. This set comes with 3 colors: US olive uniform, ochre green, and dark leather. So for now, that's all I have to work with. So to start the process, I primed these figures with a mahogany Mr. Finishing Surfacer, and then I gave them a highlight coat with Tamiya flat white. From there, I started applying the Quick Gen paint. These are US Airborne soldiers, so I'm using the green ochre for their uniform base color. Now for my first pass, I applied it without any thinning, just picking up the paint off the wet palette and putting on the figure's uniform. On most of the paints in this line, AK did us a solid and listed the intensity on the dropper bottle. But they didn't do that for the military range. I wish they had, because as you can see, this particular color is very opaque and there's a strong yellow tint to it too. Now, I should note here with these paints, it's important to let them dry before you start adding any further layers. All right, while our radio man dries, I started putting some of the dark leather on the officer's holster and olive green on his helmet. But this time I thinned it out a little bit more with some water. I like the coverage with the more thinned down version of the paint, though I will need to apply further layers. I'll also add that the green and the leather paints here are also pretty intense in opacity. I like the coverage I'm getting with the thinned down paint, though I will need to apply further layers. I will add that the green and the leather are also pretty intense in their opacity too. The paint is creating some natural shading. It's lighter on top, darker around the edges, and in the spaces between the netting. Same with the holster, though you can't really see that as well. Though I would like them to be a little bit darker. But this is just the first coat. You can also see that this paint has a little bit of a satin finish to it, a little bit more than I would prefer for my uniforms, but that's easy enough to fix with some matte varnish when we're done. I think the boots turned out pretty nice. The left one definitely looks a little bit better, and I used a thinner coat of paint on that one. I think the officer's helmet looks pretty good too, but you can definitely see that it needs another coat or 2 of paint. Now for the radio man's helmet, I'm gonna go a little bit thicker with my paint. After I put the base color on the uniforms, I went back to paint the olive green patches on the knees and elbows, and in the process, I learned a little bit about trying to paint over these Quick Gen paints with other Quick Gen colors. These paints can be hard to cover up. It took me a few passes with the olive green over the ochre to get those parts painted in, and that was without thinning the green paint. If you're gonna paint over the more intense Quick Gen colors like these, be sure you're working from light to dark. And if you're trying to paint a lighter quick gen color over a darker one, I'm just not sure it's going to work very well. I decided to go back and paint the details with just the standard acrylics because I didn't have any of the other quick gen colors. And I do that because it's hard for me when figure painting to get an overall sense of the figure if there's big spots of unpainted stuff on the guy. You could use this quick gen contrast paint for detail work like this. It doesn't bleed like a wash, it doesn't run, which is one really nice quality about this paint. You don't have to worry about it seeping into areas where you don't want it. You just have to have the right colors, which I did not. Now here's another application for these paints that I'm pretty intrigued by, and I definitely want to experiment with it further. I tried using some of the dark leather on the green ochre uniforms for a shadow color, just to give them a little bit more depth and darkness to the shadows. And I think it worked out pretty nicely, even though it was kind of a limited experiment. I think this quick gen paint could work out nicely for things like shadows and highlights when it comes to figure painting, even if you're using like the standard acrylic glazing method, because it doesn't leave hard lines. It's, it reduces the effort you have to put into it to blend the paints together so you don't get those harsh transitions between shadows and highlights. So I think it's really useful for that. But again, I want to try it out a little bit further with some better colors for it. All right, so now there's a third trooper that goes with this trio that I'd already painted using the regular approach with traditional acrylics. But his color was kind of off from these two, as you can see. So I decided to try something with this quick gen paint. I'm basically using it like you would a glaze, a very thin glaze, aiming to change the tone in order to match the others a little better. Now I'm using some of the green ochre here, and it's thinned down quite a bit with water, and I'm just going over the tan parts of his uniform, nothing else. I think this worked out pretty well overall. The guy looks a lot more consistent with the other two soldiers I painted with the quick gen paint. Now, there's still some tonal variation here, but that's not especially unusual with World War II uniforms like this. At any rate, I think this is another cool way that you can use these quick gen paints, whether you want to use it for uniforms or stowage on a tank. Another good reason to have some of these colors in your arsenal. So this was just a preliminary experiment with 3 colors of these paints, but I'm really happy with the results so far. Now there's definitely some pros and cons with these paints, and I will say that there seems to be early results a little bit more in the pro column than the con column. Pros, they're easy to work with. The colors don't run. They can be thinned easily, and they're super versatile. As far as cons go, I will say that some of these these colors for sure are super opaque, and you have to be aware of that when you're going into the mix. Now, some of the colors have the intensity marked on the bottom of the label for the bottle, but the military series colors do not, which I think is a little bit of a disadvantage. Another thing I would kind of caution you about is the pooling you get with these. Don't apply them with a lot of paint on your brush, because it does tend to pool in the recesses and adds to the drying time and gets a super dark color where maybe you don't necessarily want it. Like I said, I just had 3 colors to work with the quick gen paints, but I really like what I got out of them. So I'm anxious to get more and kind of keep experimenting with it. One thing I'm really interested in for sure is the flesh colors that they make. I think that's another way, like if you don't want to endure the strain and pain of painting a 35th scale face, that could be a good way to do it, but I want to test it and see. Overall, I really like this quick gen paint. I think it's got a lot of potential to be useful for scale modelers, even if you don't want to switch over and use it whole cloth for figure painting. So I recommend it. I think it's worth going out and picking up a few colors and experiment around with it. Have some fun.